The rope burns his palms. The stone shifts. Men scream. A wooden sled jerks forward across the wet clay, and for one terrible breath, the weight behind it begins to slide too fast. The foreman's voice cracks through the morning air. Whips snap. Sand sprays into open eyes. A young worker stumbles, falls beneath the rope, and the limestone block groans like a living thing ready to crush him flat against the earth. The sun has barely risen above the eastern bank of the Nile, yet the heat already presses down like judgment. Dust clings to sweat. Breath tastes of grit and fear. This is not a battlefield. There are no enemies in sight. No invading army. No roaring chariots. Only labor. Only stone. Only men whose names will never be carved into the monuments they are building. The block steadies. The fallen boy is dragged free. The sled creaks onward toward the rising skeleton of a temple that will outlive them all. But as the rope tightens again around blistered hands, a question hangs heavier than the stone itself. What did it truly mean to live and to endure as a common worker in ancient Egypt in 1300 BC, at the height of an empire that promised eternity but demanded everything in return? The year is around 1300 BC. The reign of Ramesses II approaches. Egypt stands at the height of its power, its borders stretching wide, its temples swelling with wealth, its pharaoh hailed as a living god. The world sees glory. Columns carved with victories, walls painted with triumph, massive statues gazing across the Nile as if they command time itself. But behind every polished relief lies a hidden story. Behind every towering pylon, thousands of hands have bled. This moment of strain at the temple site is not a single accident. It is a fracture line. The empire's grandeur depends entirely on men like the one clutching the rope. Farmers pulled from their fields during flood season, craftsmen conscripted from royal projects, laborers organized into crews that move mountains one block at a time. They are not slaves in chains, as legend often whispers. Many are paid in grain and beer. They are fed, housed, counted. They are recorded on papyrus. They are essential. And yet, they stand at the breaking point between survival and exhaustion, between devotion and quiet resentment. For Egypt's greatness rests on their backs, and the strain is beginning to show. To understand the tension in that rope, one must see the world that shaped it. Egypt in 1300 BC is a river kingdom, a civilization pulsing in rhythm with the Nile. Each year, the river swells and spills over its banks, flooding the fields with dark, fertile silt. When the waters retreat, they leave behind life. Wheat rises golden under the sun. Barley ripples in the wind. Date palms cast slender shadows across irrigation ditches cut by hand and hope. Villages cluster along the riverbanks. Mud brick homes huddle together, their flat roofs catching the breeze at dusk. Children chase each other between granaries. Women grind grain on stone querns, their arms strong from repetition. Men repair nets and sharpen copper tools while listening to distant temple chants carried by wind. In these years, Egypt is stable. The state is powerful. Trade flows from Nubia in the south to the Levant in the north. Gold, incense, cedar wood, lapis lazuli, treasures arrive in exchange for grain and manufactured goods. The pharaoh is not merely a king. He is the axis of the cosmos. His health ensures the Nile's flood. His strength preserves Maat, the sacred order of the universe. Most people accept this without question. Life is hard, but it is predictable. The river rises, the river falls. Crops grow, taxes are collected, offerings are made. The sun returns each dawn. It feels eternal, but eternity is expensive. Egyptian society is layered like sediment along the Nile. At the summit stands the pharaoh, divine and distant. Beneath him, the royal family, high priests and powerful officials, men who oversee temple estates and command armies. Below them, scribes move quietly through corridors of power. They hold brushes instead of swords, but their influence is profound. They record harvest yields, track labor quotas, calculate rations. Literacy is rare, and those who possess it shape reality itself. Then come the skilled artisans, sculptors, carpenters, metalworkers, men whose craft turns stone and wood into symbols of divine permanence. At the base stand the farmers and laborers, the majority, the heartbeat. For much of the year, they till their own small plots. They owe taxes in grain to the state and to the temples. When the Nile floods and fields lie underwater, they are summoned to work on royal projects. Corvée labor, a civic duty. They raise temple walls. They haul statues that weigh more than 100 men combined. Payment comes in measured sacks of grain, jars of beer, onions, dried fish. Enough to sustain a family if the flood was generous and the overseer fair. The mindset is simple yet immense. To work for the pharaoh is to serve the gods. To contribute to a temple is to secure favor in the afterlife. Most believe this, but belief does not soften stone. The strain did not begin at the temple site. It began years earlier in the quiet arithmetic of ambition. As pharaohs competed to outshine their predecessors, monuments grew larger, colossi became taller, reliefs more elaborate, tombs deeper. Each project required more manpower, more grain, more transport, more organization. Success bred expectation. If one king built a grand hall, the next must build two. If one carved victories into granite, the next must carve them deeper. The empire's military campaigns also demanded resources: chariots, bronze weapons, supplies for distant garrisons, all drawn from the same agricultural base. In years when the Nile's flood ran slightly lower than expected, the margin thinned. A smaller harvest meant tighter rations. Tighter rations meant hunger at the edges of villages. But the projects did not shrink. They expanded. The invisible origin of tension lies here, in the gap between divine ambition and human limitation. The first visible cracks appear not in distant fields, but in places like Thebes. Thebes, with its vast temple complex at Karnak, is a city of ritual and labor. Priests process through columned halls heavy with incense. Foreign envoys stare up at towering obelisks. Scribes hurry between storehouses. Outside the sacred precincts, workers' settlements buzz with exhaustion. Rations arrive late. A shipment of grain meant for temple laborers is diverted to support a military campaign upriver. Families wait in doorways as children cry from hunger. Beer jars are rationed thinner than before. Whispers circulate in the dusk. The gods must be displeased, or perhaps the officials are corrupt. At the worksite, men pull harder, that their strength falters sooner. The midday sun feels hotter, the sleds move slower. A foreman records absences on papyrus. Illness spreads through cramped housing. A mason's chisel slips, carving a flaw into a block meant for a sacred wall. The city continues its rituals, but under the hymns lies a tremor. What begins as a minor delay in Thebes spreads along the Nile like a stain. In Memphis, officials argue over allocations. Temple estates demand their share first, claiming divine priority. Military officers insist on provisioning troops stationed near the Hittite frontier. Villages upriver report lower yields. A slightly weaker flood leaves some fields dry at the edges. Farmers stretch seed grain thinner, hoping next year will compensate. Caravans carrying stone from quarries arrive later than planned. Oxen collapse under heavier loads. Repairs to irrigation canals are postponed as labor is redirected toward monumental construction. Region by region, the balance tilts. Not into open chaos,
but into strain. The system that once felt eternal begins to feel tight, like rope pulled to its limit. When tension rises, humans search for meaning. Priests increase offerings. Extra incense burns in temple courts. Processions grow longer, chants more fervent. If the flood was weak, perhaps a ritual was neglected. If illness spreads, perhaps a god was slighted. Superstition deepens where certainty fades. Officials respond with stricter quotas. If grain is scarce, collect more. If workers are tired, replace them. If a crew complains, record their names. In one workers' settlement, a small group refuses to report to duty until rations are restored.
It is not rebellion, not yet. It is desperation. The overseer reacts harshly. Punishments are swift. Fear suppresses open dissent, but resentment simmers. Mistakes multiply. A temple wall must be dismantled and rebuilt because measurements were rushed, resources wasted, time lost. Each attempt to fix the strain seems only to tighten it. As shortages persist, something less visible begins to erode. Trust. Neighbors who once shared surplus grain now guard their stores. Families who once celebrated festivals together whisper about favoritism in ration distribution. Scribes, once respected, are eyed with suspicion. Are they recording accurately or skimming from the top? Corruption accusations circulate without proof. The moral fabric frays. In a small riverside village, a man steals barley from a communal granary. He is caught. The punishment is severe, yet those who watch feel a flicker of sympathy rather than outrage. Institutions remain standing, temples, administrative halls, courts, but their authority feels thinner. When belief in divine order wavers even slightly, the psychological foundation of the empire trembles. In times of pressure, blame becomes currency. Foreigners are convenient targets. Nubian traders are accused of hoarding. Levantine merchants are suspected of manipulating prices. Within Egypt, lower officials are scapegoated for shortages rooted in structural overreach. Some are removed, publicly shamed, replaced by others who inherit the same impossible arithmetic. In workers' quarters, factions form. Those loyal to temple authorities clash verbally with those who mutter that the Pharaohs' ambitions have grown too vast. No open civil war erupts. Egypt does not implode overnight. But radicalization is not always loud. Sometimes it is a narrowing of empathy, a hardening of hearts. The devastation in 1300 BC is not a dramatic collapse of cities into ruin. It is more insidious. Fields left partially untended yield less. Malnutrition weakens immune systems. Minor illnesses become fatal for the elderly and the very young. A laborer hauling stone develops a persistent cough from quarry dust. There is no physician nearby, only herbal remedies and prayer. Temple projects continue, but at a slower pace. Each delay compounds costs, more grain diverted, more strain on villages. Beyond the cities, in marginal lands at the edges of cultivation, some families abandon their plots entirely, seeking better fortune closer to major centers. Migration disrupts local networks of support. The landscape itself changes subtly. Irrigation channels silt up where maintenance lags. The Nile still rises and falls, indifferent to human ambition. Devastation does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers through empty storehouses and shallow graves. Yet history is rarely a straight descent. Over time, adjustments emerge. Some monumental projects are scaled back. Officials quietly reduce quotas. Grain distribution is reorganized to stabilize key labor forces. A stronger Nile flood replenishes depleted reserves, offering temporary relief. Harvests improve, rations grow steadier.
Communities adapt. Informal networks of mutual aid reappear. Families rebuild trust slowly through shared meals and collective work on irrigation repairs. The empire does not collapse in 1300 BC. It bends. The tension in the rope loosens slightly, but the memory of strain lingers in the bodies of those who endured it. For the common worker, the transformation is subtle but lasting. He has seen that the divine order can wobble. He has felt hunger even under the gaze of colossal gods carved in stone. He understands now that eternity is constructed day by day, ration by ration, block by block. Egypt continues to build. Ramesses II will raise monuments that astonish the modern world. His statues will stand in deserts long after the workers' mud-brick homes have melted back into earth. Yet beneath every towering colossus lies the imprint of ordinary lives. Men who rose before dawn, who tied rope around blistered hands, who believed or doubted or simply endured. Their world did not shatter in a single cataclysm. It strained, adapted, survived. The lesson is not of sudden apocalypse, but of cumulative pressure, of how greatness demands labor, of how systems that appear eternal are in truth balanced on fragile human shoulders. Today we walk through museums and marvel at the symmetry of temple walls. We photograph obelisks and trace hieroglyphs with reverent fingers. Rarely do we imagine the taste of dust in a worker's mouth, the ache in his spine at sunset, the quiet fear when rations ran thin. Ancient Egypt was not only pharaohs and pyramids, it was calloused hands pulling rope in the heat. It was mothers measuring grain carefully so children would not go hungry. It was belief, powerful, sustaining belief, tested by reality. The empire endured for centuries because its people endured. And as the sun sets once more over the Nile, casting long shadows across stone older than memory, one truth remains. Civilizations are not built by gods. They are built by men who wake before dawn, tighten their grip, and pull.
His name was Ka. There was nothing extraordinary about that name. It was as common as the clay along the Nile's banks, as familiar as the smell of bread baking before dawn. There were dozens of Kas in his village, perhaps hundreds scattered across the delta. But this was his Ka, the son of a farmer who had died too soon, the eldest brother of 3 children, the man whose hands had learned the weight of the world before they had learned to read the signs of the sky. Ka was 23 years old the first time the rope burned his palms at the temple construction site. 23 years old with a face that looked older, not from the cruelty of life, but from the attention it demanded. His eyes, dark as dried mud, had a habit of resting on things too long, on the flight of a bird, on the way irrigation water trickled between 2 bricks, on the face of his supervisor when the ration numbers did not add up. It was this attention that made him dangerous, though he himself did not know it yet. What scribes do not write. The papyrus recorded everything, or nearly everything. Production quotas, the number of blocks moved, the names of the absent, the names of the dead. There were young scribes with quick eyes who walked between the rows of workers with their palettes and brushes, noting, always noting, as if the world only existed because someone had taken the trouble to describe it. But there were things the scribes did not write. They did not write the moment Ka noticed that the man to his left, a worker named Usir, father of 2 small children, had disappeared from the line without any corresponding notation on the papyrus. Usir was simply no longer there, replaced by another equally exhausted man, equally nameless in the great account of the stones. They did not write the silence that fell over the communal dormitory after the torches were extinguished, a silence that was not peace, but the held breath of men who knew that speaking was dangerous and that not speaking meant slowly losing something essential within themselves. They did not write the small ceremony the workers performed before each day's labor, a hand placed briefly on the stone, a word whispered to the block they were about to move. It was an ancient gesture, older than the temples, older than Egypt as Ka knew it, a silent negotiation with the weight of the world. Ka took part in this ceremony every day, not out of superstition, or perhaps out of superstition, but an honest kind, one that acknowledged that certain things were larger than any man, and that acknowledgement was the only form of dignity available. The logic of hunger. On the 15th day of the second month of work, the rations were reduced. The news arrived not as a formal announcement, but the way bad news arrives in places where people have learned to distrust official forms, whispered from mouth to mouth, confirmed by the weight of the grain sacks distributed at dusk. The sacks were visibly lighter. A man named Nebwenenef, the oldest member of Ka's crew, a 50-year-old who had survived 3 great building projects, lifted his and let a bitter smile spread across his weathered face. "Let us pray that next month will be more generous," he said, and everyone understood it was not a prayer. The logic of hunger has its own geometry. It is neither simple nor linear. A man with less food does not produce less work proportionally. He produces less work exponentially, because physical weakness multiplies with weakness of spirit, which multiplies with irritability, which leads to errors, which lead to more weakness. A limestone block that normally required 8 men began to require 10. An operation that lasted a morning lasted a full day. Supervisors tightened the quotas. Men pushed beyond what their bodies permitted. And at night, in the dormitory, the silence grew heavier still. Ka observed all of this with the attention that was his mark, not with anger. Anger was a luxury for men with energy to spare, but with a kind of cold curiosity, like someone studying the patterns of the Nile's floods and trying to predict what would come next. What came next, he knew, was rarely good. The man who asked questions. Around this time, Ka met Ipuki. Ipuki was different from the other workers in the most inconvenient way possible. He asked questions out loud. Not dangerous questions, at least not intentionally, practical questions, almost childlike in their simplicity. Why do we move this block east and then north when we could bring it directly from the boat through the southern canal? If we reorganize the crews into 4-hour shifts instead of 6, would we not rest more and produce the same? Has anyone calculated how much grain we could save if the dormitories were built closer to the worksite? Ipuki's supervisor, a man named Hori, who had reached his position by the sole merit of never having asked a question in his life, received these questions with the expression of someone who smells something they cannot identify, but which definitely does not please them. "Work and be quiet," was Hori's standard response. But Ipuki's questions hung in the air like limestone dust, invisible but present, entering the lungs of everyone around him. Ka inhaled them with particular attention. In the evenings, when the two found themselves near each other in the ration line, Ka did what the supervisors never did. He answered. Because the scribe who planned the route transport learned to plan routes at a temple built 30 years ago and has never gone south of the canal to see what has changed, Ka said one evening in response to the question about logistics. Ipuki looked at him as if he had just received an unexpected gift. "So you know." "I know what I see." "And what do you see?" Ka was silent for a long moment. Around them, men ate in silence or dozed against the mud walls. A torch crackled. Outside, the Nile continued on its eternal course, indifferent to production quotas. What Ka understood instinctively,
and what would take civilizations centuries to articulate in formal terms, was that power has its own geometry, and that geometry tends to preserve itself regardless of its efficiency. The scribe who planned the transport routes learned his craft from an older scribe, who learned from one older still. Each generation transmitted not only the knowledge, but the errors embedded within it, the invisible assumptions, the routes traced according to the position of structures that had long since changed, the calculations based on Nile levels belonging to decades past. To question that inheritance was not merely inconvenient, it was, in some profound sense, a threat to the order of the cosmos. If the scribe was wrong, then the scribe who taught him was wrong. And if that scribe was wrong, then an entire chain of authority was in question. And when authority begins to be questioned, order begins to dissolve. And when order dissolves, chaos returns. And chaos is the absence of Ma'at, and the absence of Ma'at is the death of everything. It was a circular and powerful logic, and Ka, looking at it from below, from the position of someone whose palms bled against the ropes, could see both its strength and its hollowness. Order was necessary, but order that did not adapt was merely a pretty name for rigidity.
The dream of the limestone block. On a night of unbearable heat, when the air inside the dormitory was nearly solid and sleep refused every invitation, Ka lay on his back, staring at the mud ceiling, and thought about the limestone block he had helped move that day. The block weighed, according to the records, the equivalent of 120 adult men. It was large enough for 10 men to stand on its surface without touching one another. It had been quarried miles away, floated downriver on a barge, dragged overland on a sled with wooden rollers beneath, and raised with levers and precise calculations to its place on the temple's growing wall. When it was finally set in place, it would be covered by a relief, probably a battle scene, the pharaoh in his war chariot, enemies bowing beneath his feet, the gods smiling from above. And that relief would be painted in vivid pigments, red and blue and gold, and sealed with a protective coating, and it would stand for millennia. Ka would never see the finished relief. His part in the work ended when the block settled into position. Another group of men would take over. Then the sculptors, then the painters, each in his own sphere, no one seeing the whole. But someone had to see the whole. Someone had to hold in mind the complete image, not just the individual block, but the entire temple. Not just the temple, but the pharaoh's design. Not just the design, but what that design meant for the men who made it possible. Ka closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw the completed temple, a vision no scribe had shown him, no priest had described, but which had taken shape in his mind from 1,000 fragments observed over weeks. He saw columns that did not yet exist. He saw a courtyard that was still bare earth. He saw the inner sanctuary where the god's statue would rest in its sacred boat. And he saw the men, not the pharaohs on the walls, the real men, small and exhausted and essential, whose names the relief would never carry. The strike that was not a strike. The incident occurred on the 23rd day. Ka's crew had been assigned to move a particularly heavy block, a corner piece that needed to be positioned with precise accuracy before the sunset, or the entire wall alignment would be compromised. It was precision work on a day of extreme exhaustion, with men who had not slept well in weeks and whose rations had been cut once more the evening before. In the middle of the operation, when the block was suspended at a critical balance point and the ropes were at the limit of their tension, the man at the front of the line simply released the rope and sat down on the ground. He said nothing, made no gesture. He simply let go and sat. The block swayed. For a moment of terror, it seemed as if everything would collapse. Men, stone, weeks of work, perhaps lives, but the others held. With effort that drew involuntary groans from parched throats, they held. Supervisor Hori came running, shouting. The man sitting on the ground, a young worker named Amenhotep, son of a potter from Memphis, looked up with eyes that held neither anger nor fear. They held only emptiness, the emptiness of someone who has reached the end of something they do not know how to name. "I cannot go on," said Amenhotep. It was a simple sentence. It was also, in a certain sense, the most subversive sentence one could utter on a pharaoh's worksite. Hori raised his staff, but before he could use it, Ka stepped forward. He said nothing provocative. He did not directly challenge the supervisor. He simply said, with the calm voice of someone stating an observable fact, "If you strike him now, he will not be able to work tomorrow, and we need him tomorrow." It was enough. Hori lowered his staff. Amenhotep was taken to rest. The block was positioned, late with redoubled effort from those who remained, but positioned. That night, Ka took a long time to fall asleep. What remains? Years later, not many years because the life of a construction worker was not long, when Ka returned to his village with a harder body and a denser silence, he tried once to explain to his youngest son what he had learned in that distant place where stones grew toward the sky. The boy was 6 years old and had his mother's eyes, she who had died too soon. "Will the temple last forever?" the boy asked. "Longer than us, certainly," Ka said. "And will people know you helped build it?" Ka was silent for a long moment. Outside, the Nile gleamed beneath the full moon, eternal and indifferent and absolutely necessary. "No," he said finally, "but I will know." The boy considered this with the seriousness of one who has not yet learned to pretend that certain answers are sufficient. "Is that enough?" Ka looked at his palms of his hands. The rope marks had become scars, pale lines against dark skin, a kind of writing no scribe had recorded, but which time had engraved with its own ink. "It has to be," he said. And that answer, incomplete, honest, weighted with everything that cannot be changed, was in a certain sense the most truthful monument Ka would ever help build. Not of stone, not of granite or limestone or gold, but of a slow and difficult understanding that dignity needs no audience to exist, that work holds value even when the relief on the wall does not carry your name, that holding the rope when everything within you wants to let go is a form of courage that papyrus records never knew how to describe. Egypt would continue. The temples would rise ever higher. Ramesses would carve his victories into every available surface, turning stone into the propaganda of eternity. And under it all, invisible and essential as the foundations buried in the earth, the men whose names were not engraved would continue to appear before dawn, to tie the ropes around their wrists, to look at the weight before them, and to find somewhere between fear and exhaustion the obscure and silent strength to go on. Not because they believed every promise that had been made to them, but because the alternative, abandoning the world and the weight it asks us to carry, was not an alternative that the human heart, in its magnificent and inexplicable stubbornness, could ever truly accept. The rope burns the palms, the stone moves, the men endure.
If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of history in your hands, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and walk with us into the next forgotten world, because the past is not silent and there are still stories waiting to be uncovered.